Hi everyone, and welcome to the PropCast. My name is Louisa Dickens, co-founder of Ella Mulry and board director of the UKPA, and I shall be your weekly host. Each week for 30 minutes, we'll be connecting the VCs, PropTech startups, and real estate professionals globally, and assist in bridging that famous communication gap we all love talking about. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the PropCast. On today's show, we'll be speaking with MREP co-founder and partner, Mikkel Lensby, on sustainable challenges and PropTech resolutions of the 21st century in real estate. So welcome, Mikkel.
Thank you, Lou. Thanks for inviting me.
No, pleasure. Those who don't know Mikkel or MREP, I'll give you a brief introduction. So Mikkel is co-founder and partner in MREP, which is the leading Northern European real estate investment house. MREP is a vertically integrated real estate product innovator, developer, investor, and operator driven by mission of making real estate better. Now, the NREP approach and mission has led NREP to not only be one of the world's most consistently outperforming managers, but also a founder and developer of several leading Nordic real estate platforms such as Pelican, Logi Centers, as well as an important counterparty for cities and large-scale city development projects and cutting-edge sustainability innovations such as the UN 17 Village and Upcycle Studios, and which we'll hear sort of more about later. Now, prior to co-founding MREP, Mikkel founded various startups himself, from all across the board in the world and in cities like Boston and Santiago, and anything from a pizza restaurant franchise to an event management company and a painting company. So he's not just focused on sustainability and sort of real estate by any means. And Mikkel is living in the beautiful city of Copenhagen and holds an impressive MBA from Harvard. So Mikkel, I hope that's a sufficient summary. Anything else you'd like to add to that?
Very flattering, very flattering. Thanks.
But no, a warm welcome to Mikkel. And I guess let's start the show, by hearing a bit more about you, about MREP, and then also tell us a little bit more about how 2150 comes into it as well.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, so as you put it, then I have an entrepreneurial background. So always from a young age, enjoyed trying to make things happen, and had absolutely no red thread in what I was doing, apart from seeing some problems and thinking that I could play a part in trying to solve them. Although those problems changed a lot over the years. As you said, my first business in 8th grade was an event management business. I think probably you would just call it throwing parties back then. But and then I did all kinds of things from a pizza franchise chain to a painting company to a fintech company in a fintech startup in London. But I had a very worried father who thought all this entrepreneurship seemed very risky. I'm very happy with him now that he sort of persuaded me to do a little bit of the more traditional sort of corporate track as well. So I did my studies, spent some time in Goldman Sachs doing investment banking, worked in a large media conglomerate doing their corporate strategy and M&A. So I always had a little bit of a dual track, I would say. And then now almost 15 years ago, I had returned to Denmark after roughly sort of 10 years abroad, and got the idea of starting a real estate investment management company here in the Nordics. And really, it was based on two main observations. So the first one was that I had been toying a bit around with the idea of creating an index fund here in the Nordics, because there were no index funds back then. And I believe that for most investors who do not have an edge, then index investing is basically the sensible thing to do. And given that offering was not up here, I thought that would be interesting. But through my work with that, I discovered that real estate globally had a fairly low allocation in the asset class. So it was only around 4% back then. And if you believed in portfolio theory, which I thought was gaining traction among sort of the institutional investors, then you should be more like 10 to 20%. So I thought it was likely there was going to be a growing demand for real estate as an investment service, you could say. And when looking at the Nordics, there was nobody really offering that. And I think more importantly, real estate in the Nordics back then was an industry which was not taken serious. So I think if you were at a cocktail party and you said you worked in real estate, you were definitely ranked below the car salesman. And the industry was really populated, and this is grossly generalizing, but by lazy coupon clippers and wheeler dealers, you could say, flipping assets. And, being an entrepreneur, I had actually personally, bought and renovated a few apartments, just for personal use. And I think the sort of entrepreneurial piece of me thought it was odd why there was not more of a product focus on the real estate, you could say. So why there was, only people fundamentally like, flipping assets and or being sort of coupon clippers, and very little focus on how do you actually make these assets more valuable for their users. And the combination of those two things made me think that maybe it could be interesting to try to build a real estate investment management company here in the Nordics. And I was, lucky to find some people who actually knew something about it, because I had never done anything apart buying, an apartment for own use. And then we set out to do that. And we're very fortunate that, to be honest, in my mind, that the bar was fairly low. So it didn't take that much to actually find ways of creating more value beyond, just trying to buy cheap and sell dear, which obviously has to be the part of the strategy for any sort of investor. But what we really did is we really did three things. So we identified segments with structural tailwind. So when I looked at the real estate industry back then, people raised money and then they went out to find a good deal. And what we believed in, which is more classic entrepreneurship, is to find somewhere where there's a supply-demand imbalance. So there's something happening that caused logistics, which was the first sector we went into, where we said, okay, within logistics, there's a very clear demand driver and there's no supply, and there's really nobody who's positioned themselves to be a real estate service provider to the logistics industry. So I find the segment with tailwind, then obviously try to find value. So find the greenest apples by having the luxury of only focusing on one thing, and then apply this customer-centric product approach to finding out how do we make this more valuable for the tenants, for the customers that I always called them, to the much confusion of everybody I was working with. Yeah, so that's kind of was our philosophy. And then secondly, I've always had a desire to build a company organizationally where you really attracted sort of people with an entrepreneurial spirit, and you tried to create an infrastructure for them where they could be allowed to run, you could say. Because my own personal experiences from working in corporates was always the experience of feeling limited. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice if one could build an organization where people come and then they really feel free and they really feel like they are allowed to sort of express themselves, as you will. Yeah. And I think that's been another quite important piece of the puzzle of having made NREP work. Because in the end, you need, an idea, and there needs to be a market opportunity, but then obviously it needs to be well executed. And that in the end is all about people and motivations.
Yeah, it's quite difficult to sort of create that culture, especially if you're, I guess, promoting that philosophy with your investments and then creating that environment that you actually work and live in. And how would 2150 slot into that then?
Yeah, so then after roughly 10 years, we felt we had delivered on our first vision of becoming the best real estate fund manager in the Nordics. Now that's obviously for others to judge, but we ourselves sort of felt like, okay, we've checked that box, and having delivered very strong returns to our investors. And we therefore almost spent a year in our partner group discussing and deliberating a bit on, okay, what's next for us? Because it's not particularly motivating to say in 5 years, we're still going to be the best in the Nordics. And I think, back then, quite naturally, probably, the way most private equity companies grow is that they fundamentally earn the investors' trust, you could say, by delivering good returns. And then they find other things that they can sell to these hard-earned relationships, and thereby they expand their business. And I think we realized that what excited us the most in the partner group and what we were most proud of was all of those projects where we had truly, made better products. So I think we realized that, we were still, all of us, we at least felt still fairly young and thought we had a lot of more good years left in us. And we realized what we really cared most about using those years to do was to fundamentally try to make better products and try to nudge the industry in a direction that we subjectively felt was a good one. And at the same time, we became more and more aware that this industry we're in, which was considered the world's largest asset class, was really the world's largest product category. And arguably a socially incredibly relevant product category because we spend, 90% of our time in it because it consumes whatever, anywhere from 40 to 60% of the world's resources, depending on what you include and exclude. And because, how you build cities really define how we get to interact as humans. And despite that, then this industry seemed to be living its complete isolated little world, parallel universe almost. It was an industry which was drastically not customer-centric. It was an industry which was very non-sustainable, and it was an industry which was very inefficient. I can't think of, any other industry where the cost of producing goods, has doubled over the last, 30, 40 years, depending on what country you're in. All other industries, they sort of know that they have to find a way to reduce the cost of their goods with whatever 1%, 4%, 5% every year to stay competitive. And in our industry, it's gone the other way, which, again, is odd. So what I realized really as an entrepreneur was that what I originally thought was an idea to, build this business and then to sell it and make some money and then do something even more interesting. I actually realized that, hey, I am just really lucky. I've randomly ended up in, the world's largest industry and product class, which, where there's so many problems to solve. And they are just, utterly meaningful at the same time. How lucky can I be? And that's when I realized personally that, I'm going to spend the rest of my life in this product class, trying to fundamentally make it more customer-centric, more sustainable, and more efficient. And I mean, that's, I think, is a nice thing to be able to spend your life on. But I also think it's commercially, abnormously attractive opportunity. So I'm not trying to, say that we want to save the world, but we think that actually improving the world, that is also how you build the best businesses.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I guess as we're focusing on sustainable challenges, what would you say the biggest sustainable challenge facing real estate is in the 21st century?
Yeah, and sorry, I'm just realizing you asked, how does 2150 fit into it? And then I started ranting, on this long.
We all love a rant.
Yeah. So well, then you got the right speaker. So let me just tie that because so what we then decided on was that we really wanted to move from the vision of being the best real estate fund manager in Nordics to a purpose of saying we want to make real estate better. And our vision is that we want to try to become the most innovative and the most competent investor in the real estate value chain. And that means everything we do in NREP in terms of sort of investing in our organization, it has to be driven by the idea that this will cause us to be more competent at making real estate better. And as part of doing that, we realized that technology clearly is holds a lot of potential for enabling the making of real estate better. And we also realized, though, that we are not a technology-savvy company. Like most other real estate participants, we're not sort of on the forefront of the technology frontier. But we really wanted to try to find a way to use it, you could say, towards our purpose. And we therefore started making a few investments from our balance sheet into technology companies that we ourselves used across our various business lines and portfolios. And then we realized that also was a little bit not focused enough. So what we saw, though, was that we could see that by us having a lot of insight on the full real estate value chain and really understanding the biggest pain points, then that helped us in identifying technologies that could help address some of these pain points. And then conversely, because we then were a user of these technologies, we could actually help the entrepreneurs, scaling their business quicker or getting sort of access. And that led to the realization that what we should really be doing is we should we should become a facilitator. So we should become a facilitator that connects the incumbents in the urban environment with technology companies. And that is 2150.
And I guess could you talk us through, like, say, one of your investments or one of your sort of success stories, which you sort of now use yourself as well and facilitate?
Yeah, I mean, actually, probably the thing that's most top of mind and that I'm most excited about right now is actually an investment that will be the first investment in the fund, which is an investment into a company called Carbon Cure, which is a Canadian company. And so the way we approach it in 2150 is again very much sort of problem driven. So one of the problems we identified is concrete. So concrete is responsible for 8% of the world's CO2 emissions, and as we are building in New York every month now, then obviously we need more and more concrete. So that needs to be solved, and obviously there are lots of good attempts on introducing more wood and other alternative materials, but for the next 10 years, concrete is for sure going to be the biggest input in terms of building the urban stack. So we need to find ways to make that more sustainable. And we've then, over half a year, sort of mapped out what are all of the technologies out there that are trying to address that problem. And I've also worked actually very closely with McKinsey around that and identified numerous interesting technologies. But there was one company that really stood out in our minds, which was this company called Carbon Cure. And the reason why they stood out is that they were really approaching the problem and saying the only way we're going to have impact quickly is if we fundamentally help the existing value chain become better. So, most of the technologies out there are trying to make a new competing technology, you could say, in reality, to sort of find new ways of creating concrete. And those, are tremendously positive, and I'm sure some of them will become tremendously successful, but it's a very, very, very big task, and it's a very long journey.
Yeah.
Because, the concrete industry is a low margin business, and so it will take some time. So these guys, they fundamentally have found a way to use CO2 as as one of the materials in the concrete making, you could say. And by doing that, they will, one, obviously absorb a little bit of CO2, and two, they basically can use less cement. And cement is the most CO2 heavy piece of concrete. So thereby they make concrete, they reduce the amount of CO2 in the concrete with roughly up to 10%. So that's obviously not a lot, but it's an incremental improvement that you can add on to all other improvements that people are already with. And importantly, it's a commercially attractive improvement because the cement is the most expensive piece of the concrete. So by eliminating some of the cement, this is actually a cost-saving exercise at the same time, which means that they've been able to get a lot of traction really quickly on a lot of concrete manufacturing plants in the US. And now we are helping them to try to enter the European market. So yeah, that's a little bit top of mind.
And I guess if you're looking at an investment, is there like a certain stage you look at, or are you stage agnostic?
Well, so the actual investment vehicle that we have will be putting in the real capital typically at sort of the A and B rounds.
Okay.
So, and I think we also feel that where we want to take most risk is when you have a validated product, also because we want to be that facilitator. And for us to disturb, if you will, one of our large strategic investors, then we also need to ensure that this product, that there's a very high likelihood that this is something that they can really use. Because, that's obviously one of the problems in our industry is that there's no habit or there's no sort of routine of really changing a lot. And there's no R&D routine in our industry. So one of the challenges for many of these new technologies is to get access and get, in the door and make the incumbents use your product. And that is what we really need to try to make easy. And that is a lot easier, obviously, when you have a product that's working rather than coming with an idea. So therefore, for those reasons, we will primarily be putting in most of the financial investments A and B rounds.
And I guess there's so many different areas of, PropTech or sustainable resolutions from, I guess, if you're looking at the development to the building of it, to the cement, to looking at reducing emissions, waste. There's so many sort of different, I guess, parts to it. Is there, when did you actually personally see an increase in interest from the real estate sort of world, the real estate industry? I mean, it's now on every fund's and, agendas, but like, when did we really see a sort of surge in interest in it and people taking it seriously? Everyone, we've known about climate change for so long, but I really feel everyone's now like, right, it's time for us to do something about it. Probably in the last 5 years. Like, would you agree with that? Or when did you sort of see it change?
I mean, just personally, I was introduced to this architect here in Denmark probably 7 years ago now, who fundamentally was dedicating his life to trying to find a way to use waste as a building material. Because his logic was that, we're running out of natural resources, essentially. And obviously this is part of what's causing the trouble, is that we are sort of harvesting all these natural materials. And he said the only raw material that we're getting more and more of is waste. So why not fundamentally try to use that as a building material, such that every time we build something, we actually eliminate a problem rather than create a new problem. And that really, that I fell in love with that concept right away, because in my mind, again, business is about solving problems. And so what he was proposing was obviously to try to take the real estate industry and make it into something that, really also was part of the solution for our environmental problem. So for me, that was, I think, one of the big epiphany moments of when we in NREP really started investing heavily in doing what a lot of people consider to be very odd back then. And I think, for sort of the real estate industry in general, I feel it's something that, as you say, it's probably been really accelerating over the last 5 years, but I think particularly sort of over the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. And I think I clearly see COVID as being an accelerator. And I think part of the reason for that is just that, we have habits. So we are just the results of our habits. So the biggest obstacle to changing something in the world is that you need to change people's habits.
Yeah.
And COVID, I think, is just a great opportunity for changing habits, because everybody's daily life has been disrupted now. And that means you're just way more open-minded for doing things differently. And I, at least, in the beginning of COVID, I was slightly worried that, a financial slowdown, would cause people to deprioritize sustainability. But I feel that I'm actually seeing the opposite. I feel that I'm seeing that the slowdown of society in general has just caused people to be more open-minded to changing behavior and increasing the awareness of the challenge that we are facing as a planet.
Do you think there needs to be is a stronger education piece that needs to be put in schools maybe, or just like some, just in general, whether it's in the papers, to try and, I guess, enhance adoption, whether it's the everyday man and women to, larger businesses? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, personally, I think that the two biggest drivers for change, partly unfortunately, but I do think that governments need to lead the way with some regulatory. I'm generally a fairly liberalistic person, but I certainly do think that you need to create incentives. And I think that is part of what government can do, and I think they are increasingly doing so. And I think the other real big potential driver of change would actually be if investors, like the end investors, the ones at the top of the food chain, if they fundamentally went out and were willing to lean out more on basically asking for investments that put more premium on it. I think that I think what's really starting to change is that I think even just 5 years ago, I think most investors saw it as a trade-off. So they were like, okay, you do sustainability, that's nice, but this is not very good for our investment. So we can understand you do it, but we're not that fond of it, you could say, And I think there's really starting to be this shift that I think more and more people are realizing that, okay, this is good business, So, and I guess if we get the whole, if we get majority of investors to obviously realize that, then I think you're going to start seeing much faster change.
Yeah. And if we're looking at other parts of, I guess, this real estate sustainability PropTech area, we're all talking about sort of creating sort of smart cities, and that's obviously sustainable cities. You at MREP, and you played an important counterpart for large-scale city development projects such as UN17 Village and Upcycle Studios. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and sort of what your involvement is, and I guess how these are sustainable innovations?
Yeah. So I think what we realized was that one of the big areas of opportunity for trying to make real estate better was really in creating new cities, or at least new parts of a city, and that the design process for that today does not really lead to the creation of good product. And let me try to explain why that is. So I think most of the urban developments you see in Western Europe, at least, then you have typically the city which sits with some land. They need to basically create more space for people coming into the cities, and then they go out and they make a master plan for this new part of town. And that's obviously the right place to start. You an architect, and you ask them to come up with fundamentally what is going to be hopefully a 200-year product, you could say. And that needs to be seen holistically, because for a town to work, you need to have the kindergarten there, and it's not very profitable to make a kindergarten, but somebody needs to make it because it benefits the whole. You might want to have some hipster cafes that might not be nearly as profitable as a Starbucks, you could say, but they will attract a different type of audience and create a different type of vibe. So point being that they make a master plan, but then they go out and sell the master plan in small pieces to individual developers. Now, each developer competes to get that piece of land, and once they've gotten it, the first thing they do is they try to change the zoning such that it can build something even more valuable, you could say. And they obviously do have no incentives to consider the whole. They only have an incentive to optimize for that small stamp that they have. And in reality, what they typically do is they do not really develop to the users of the town. They develop to a pension fund, or some sort of an investor at least, that will be the acquirer of whatever they build. And therefore, almost by design, you're very likely to get an area or a town that is where there's not much put into thinking about the sustainability angles. There's not much put into really thinking holistically about making this 200-year product. So that was one of the, I think, realizations we got. And we therefore started talking to municipalities about what if we went in rather as a joint venture partner. So, you stay in as well. And we are thereby fully aligned around the whole of the product that we're going to be creating. And then we, take a little bit longer time horizon on this, and then we try to build something together where we really think holistically about putting in the kindergarten in this corner, or putting in, our first urban development is something called North Harbor. And for example, there we also have I don't know what you call it, but like a swimming. So it's out to the water, and we've created this, swimming area with a sauna and with, showers and stuff like that. Which
lovely.
Yeah, and which doesn't, that's obviously not a good investment if you only do that. But it obviously adds something to the whole area, which makes the whole area richer and better. So those are one of the things that we believe a lot in, and where we're investing a lot of resources in trying to see how can we make it better. We're also involved in a social, in a sort of socially stigmatized area, where we, again, together with the municipality, have done a joint venture to fundamentally try to improve that area. And we realized there was that in that area, there was only one type of living situation, you could say. So you could either rent a 40 square meter apartment, or you could rent a 55 square meter apartment. And that was it. And there was lots of it, but those are the only two types of units, and the only way you could live there. And again, obviously, if you have a completely uniform offering, you're very likely to get a pretty uniform sort of citizency, if you will.
Yeah.
So in that project, we are working on fundamentally drastically changing the combination of what's in there. And again, we have strong belief that it's going to be something that's going to make that a much better holistic experience. And which again, I think goes hand in hand with making it a better social offering, but also, makes it a better investment. So again, I think we spent a lot of time actually over the last few years getting our investors on board with the fact that, hey, this is not a trade-off. This is a truly, you truly can create win-wins by doing this.
Yeah. And I guess personally, or like for MREP, are there any sort of sustainable technologies or PropTech solutions you think are missing out there? I mean, there's definitely obviously lots of businesses popping up now. Lots of them are doing something which is more sort of all-inclusive. Some of them are solving one problem in real estate. Is there something you think might be missing or that you're particularly sort of looking for? You mentioned obviously concrete. That's sort of obviously going to be high yielding and of interest. But anything you're sort of looking for?
Well, I mean, so we've identified lots of different problems that we would love to try to tackle with technology. And, I think, one, modularity in my mind is clearly one of the solutions for both sustainability and for productivity. So that's something we are investing a lot into. We are investing a lot into the whole sort of retrofitting, so how do you make, because one of my worries I had with all the BREEAM and LEED and all that when it came out was that, do you risk that this just leads to obsolescence? Because from a sustainability perspective, clearly the absolute worst thing you can do is to tear down a building and build something again. Like, if you look at a life cycle analysis of a building, and if you assume that it will only live for 15 years, just for sake of argument, then essentially the CO2 footprint, half of that over a 50-year lifetime comes from the construction. So I was always very worried that all these certifications were going to lead to people starting to have to tear down all the obsolete buildings because they don't live up to LEED and BREEAM, you could say. And again, I think LEED and BREEAM are great from the perspective of trying to create steering on how do you actually make new buildings more sustainable. But, it would be very sad if that led to everything else having to be torn down, because then it's not very sustainable. So personally, I think that, finding ways to fundamentally make existing stock more sustainable is something that's super interesting. I think in particular, when you look at all the systems inside a building, HVAC, lighting, all these kind of things, which today are generally analog in most old buildings, finding ways to optimize those systems, I think is super exciting. And then, back to the point about the footprint, I think probably one of the more difficult ones, but one that I really am still very excited about, is this idea of using waste as a building material. And we I think we've built, I don't know if they are the first in the world, but I think they're the first in the world, where we built here in Denmark, 2 large projects where 80% of the building materials was basically waste that we transformed into a building material, you could say. But the challenge with that is just that the supply chains are obviously not there. So to make that commercial, there's a long road, you could say. And so that's personally just one of the areas that I'm, that I would really like to be part of solving. But I also recognize that it's complicated, because the existing building materials supply chains have been optimized for the last, 150 years. And obviously, when you start using waste as a building material, there's lots of challenges to deal with, also because of obviously safety. I mean, when you build something, you need to make sure it works. So there's lots of problems, and you don't really have the supply chains that will feed you with these materials, and therefore it becomes in reality a bit more expensive to do this. And I think in the end, the way you're going to make sustainability work is by it needs to also be commercially sustainable.
Yeah. And I guess another part of NREP, you have your living side of it. You've got, tell me if I'm pronouncing this wrong, Umeus, Umeus. How do you pronounce that?
It's Umeus, but
I did get it right.
But it stands for you, me, us.
Okay. And tell us a little bit more about that, because obviously there's a massive growth in sort of micro housing, making, whether it's sort of making space sort of more efficient, but obviously making it sustainable sort of living. How can we create, this massive housing shortage across the world? Tell us a little bit more about the housing part of your business.
Yeah, so this was a direct consequence of our new vision. So we said, listen up, we want to make real estate better. So let's really start understanding the customers. So 5 years ago, we went out and we interviewed, about 40,000 customers on the living side. So we said, okay, living is one of the categories that where we think there's room to make things better. And we basically went in and we just went to various demographic groups and we tried to understand, how can we fundamentally service you the best way with a living product. And I think, here again, the Nordics, we've been a little bit behind. If you look at the US, you have for much longer have the concept of various types of living as a service. But that's sort of what this led us to. So we identified, various groups. So we have a student housing platform called Umius. We have a young professionals platform called Noli. We have actually maybe an interesting one. So we after having worked also with anthropologists on these different demographic groups, we identified two groups that we actually found there was a nice synergy between. And these were what many people call the empty nesters, or active adults, I think is a probably more positive connotation. But so the people where the kids have moved from home and they might be looking into, slowly exiting the working market. And what we realized with these people is that they generally, and obviously, again, within each demography, you have obviously different people. So these are gross generalizations. But what we realized is that they generally were quite interested in moving a little bit out of the city again. So being a bit more closer to green areas. They were very adamant that they did not want to live together with only other people in their age, because one thing that was absolutely adamant was that they did not want to be seen or labeled as active adults, you would say. so they did not want to be only together with sort of older people. And then they were generally worried about being socially isolated.
Yeah.
And what we realized was beautiful was there was another demography, which was families with kids, below 10. So they generally really cared about, safety. They actually liked the idea of having a garden. So again, being a little bit outside the city would be really, really nice. And they desperately needed warm hands, I should say. They needed somebody who could just look after the little one when one was sick and they still had to go to work, or somebody that could potentially, cook, And we realized that there was a kind of a neat synergistic opportunity between these two demographic groups. And I've created a concept called the plus houses, where we create in reality communities where you have, one cluster of 10 small houses and another cluster of 10 small houses. And then one cluster is for like the families with kids, and one is for the active adults. And around the active adults, you will have vegetable gardens, stuff like that. Around the kids, you have playgrounds. And then in the middle, you have these really nice communal areas where we then have a host. And the host then, the only job of the host is actually to cause all the citizens of this little society to build all these clubs, So there will be a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday eating club, you would say. And then, as a family, you will choose to be part of that 2 days a week, for example. And the other days you cook for yourself. And you will have a nanny club. So for some of the active adults who would love to look after kids, once in a while, stuff like that. So as an example. Yeah. And then in that way, you create content from the citizens themselves, you would say, which again, we feel is a way of making real estate better.
It's crazy to see the way this general sort of living has changed, especially over the past 5 years. This whole concept like co-living, different alternative living. So it's something which we would never, personally, I would never thought of when I first left university. I always thought I had one option. You had to go to the city, move in on your own and make your own way. But there's so many other solutions now, which is great. It makes it so much more enjoyable. I think people forget how lonely you can be, even though you're surrounded in a massive city, surrounded by so many people, how lonely going to work and all the stuff you have to sort of, get through by yourself. But these different solutions are brilliant.
And what's crazy, if I can just add, is that, again, I think, in Denmark at least, when you when you were looking, whether you were a student or whether you were a professional or whether you were like a family with kids, in reality, there's only been two generic options for living, which is basically either you rent an apartment or you buy an apartment. And again, if you use the product analogy, I mean, I do not know of any other product category where people do not spend more time on segmenting their customers, branding their products, figuring out how else can I service these customers of mine. So in my mind, it's quite baffling, actually, that we've been so behind.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what the next sort of 10 plus years hold for us. And I guess on that sort of topic, for NREP and for you, what would success look like in sort of if we're looking ahead to sort of 10 years?
Success will be that we have very measurably been part of both making the urban product more sustainable and actually also more sort of socially inclusive. I think these are the things that we believe are at the top of the agenda on our minds. It's like, how do we fundamentally make the urban stack more efficient and more customer-centric and more sustainable? Wow. And we want to see sort of measurable results.
Well, it sounds like you're on track so far, just hearing from you today. And unfortunately, we're coming to the end of the PropCast. But I guess before we go, is there any sort of bit of parting information you'd like to share with our audience, and the best way to connect with NREP as well?
No, thanks for having me. Really happy that you hold these venues, because I think in the end, as we also discussed, it's all about sort of spreading knowledge in order to sort of, it's such a big industry now. So there's no way we can do this on our own. It requires all of us to live together. So actually, mostly just thanking you for giving me the opportunity to share. And we're obviously always looking for passionate, motivated people who share our beliefs that the business is about solving problems and who are excited about the urban stack. So if there are listeners like that, then shoot us a mail.
For sure. And your website what's the website details?
It's NREP, so NREP.com. So clearly not a very well chosen name. So I guess it shows about it shows about the lacking sort of product centric origins also of ourselves.
Don't worry about it. We're sort of all learning. I think we've changed our website so many times. .com, .co, .co.uk. So don't worry. Okay, Brill. Well, look, Mikkel, absolute pleasure having you on the PropCast, and I'm looking forward to catching up with you after the show.
Pleasure meeting you, Lou, and have a lovely day.
Thank you for joining us this week on the PropCast, and a big thanks to our special guests. Make sure you visit our website, www.lmre.co.uk, where you can subscribe to our show, or you'll find us on iTunes and Spotify, where all good content is found. Whilst you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate if you could rate and review us on iTunes, or if you simply just spread the word. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday, and I'll catch you later.
You're listening to a Podcast Company podcast. This was made by Podcast Syndicator, where we help you go from start to grow to making money with your podcast. Let us help you share your message and your voice with the world. Reach out now, Jason at podcastsyndicator.com or Brett at podcastsyndicator.com to find out more. Thank you for listening, and do come back to hear nothing but the best podcasts.